Hello, my name's Alyssa Sampson, and let's just say this story didn't start at the job interview. It started long before, with a sister who always smiled for the cameras but sharpened her words behind closed doors. I showed up hoping for a fair shot. Instead, I walked into a setup. My resume was ignored, my voice dismissed, my own sister leading the attack. Just when they thought they'd humiliate me into silence, he walked in, the one person they didn't expect, my fiancé, their boss. But what hurt most wasn't the sabotage. It was realizing my own family had been rewriting my story for years. How did it get this far? Why was I always the one they chose to erase? I arrived 15 minutes early, resume tucked under my arm, shoes freshly polished but already pinching at the toes. Denver's spring wind slapped at the back of my coat as I walked into the lobby of Apex Solutions, a towering glass box that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought warmth was a weakness. Inside, everything gleamed: chrome elevator doors, white marble floors, digital panels blinking with schedules and department names. I made my way to the reception desk, smiled politely, and gave my name. The receptionist, a woman barely older than 20 with perfect eyeliner and a phone glued to her ear, looked down at the screen. Then she looked back at me. "I'm sorry, can you spell that again?" I did, twice. She still frowned. "Huh, you're not showing up on the candidate list." My stomach tightened. I was confirmed. I have the email. She tilted the monitor so I couldn't see. "Okay, just have a seat for now. We'll figure it out." That seat turned out to be the corner one, across from the bathrooms next to a dusty plant. As I sat, 3 more candidates walked in, suits sharper than mine, hair better styled, voices full of practiced charm. One of them barely nodded at me before gliding toward the elevators. And then she walked in, Jessica, my sister. Navy heels clicking like gunfire on marble, a navy blouse tailored to perfection, a silver watch I'd seen her wear in family photos with Dad. Her eyes swept across the room and landed on me. No smile, no acknowledgement. She turned away, said something to the receptionist, and disappeared behind the frosted glass of the executive elevators. I sat back and exhaled through my nose. This was no coincidence. She'd known I was applying. I told her over coffee 2 months ago, back when we were pretending to be civil. She hadn't said a word then, just nodded, sipping her triple oat latte, and murmured, "Corporate culture can be competitive." 10 minutes passed, then 20. I watched as the other candidates were called upstairs, one by one, welcomed, greeted, escorted. No one came for me. I walked back to the desk. "Excuse me, any update?" "Oh, they said you can join the next group going up. Sorry for the delay." No eye contact, no apology. When I finally entered the interview room, it was like stepping into a glass fishbowl. Everything transparent, everything too clean. Panelists sat in a semicircle, 5 of them, not including Jessica, who was now sipping from a matte black mug that probably cost more than my entire outfit. The only seat left was off to the side, slightly out of the circle, like an accident, but not really. I walked to it, paused, and tried to shift it subtly into alignment. The legs screeched across the floor. Every head turned. Jessica didn't. She sipped, crossed one leg over the other, and whispered something to the woman beside her, who gave a little laugh. My cheeks burned. I sat down, back straight, eyes forward. The introductions began. One by one, candidates were asked to stand and share their background. Ivy League here, Fortune 500 internship there. Phrases like data-centric innovation and scalable transformation flew like confetti. I watched, listened, waited. Jessica smiled at all of them, took notes, occasionally leaned forward in interest. My turn came, and no one looked up. I cleared my throat, gave my pitch. A career rebuilt from freelance platforms. Late nights, solo wins, no gaps, just grit. No reaction, no questions. Jessica flipped her pen. I sat back down. Mark, the panelist with slicked back hair and a tie too loud for his age, smirked and said, "Let's move on." I froze. So that was it. This wasn't an interview. It was a performance, and I wasn't part of the script. A paper shuffle, a suppressed laugh. Jessica leaned back, lips pressed into something that looked too much like victory. I thought of that middle school memory, the day my name was left off the student roll on purpose, and I stood awkwardly in front of 30 classmates while my teacher said, "Are you sure you're in this class?" That same cold knot returned to my stomach, but I stayed silent. I knew what this was. This wasn't about qualifications. This was personal, and she'd made sure I'd feel it before the real show even began. The room hadn't changed. The air was still cool, and the glass walls still gleamed, like nothing ugly could ever live inside them. But my hands were damp now, and my spine was buzzing. I kept my breathing slow, steady, the kind of breathing I used to practice before presentations back when the audience wasn't my sister pretending I didn't exist. A man from HR wrapped up the standard speech about leadership and adaptability, then turned the floor over to the panel. Jessica stood without looking at me and clapped her hands once. "Let's get real," she said, flashing her perfect corporate smile. "We've heard enough about leadership from the brochures. Let's see how you all think on your feet." She didn't glance at the others. Her eyes swept the room like she was holding court. Then she stopped on me. "Alyssa," she said lightly, as if we'd never shared a room as children, as if she hadn't once told me to my face that I'd never last in this industry. "Why don't you start?" There was no warning, just that name, hers in my mouth, spit back at me. I stood, straightened the folder in my hands, looked to Mark, Sarah, then back to her. Recently, Jessica cut me off with a laugh that didn't belong in a room like this.
"Led or joined?" she asked sweetly, because the way I heard it, the final implementation didn't quite land. Or am I mixing you up with one of your previous gigs? There were so many. A ripple of chuckles passed through the panel. "I mean," she added, turning to the others, "Alyssa's got heart. She's always had heart, even when she was running from one consulting job to the next, trying to find her footing." I didn't flinch, not outside, but I felt the heat climb my neck. My nails dug into the edge of my folder, pressing hard to keep my face still. "She's good at starting things," Jessica continued, like she was reciting a character flaw from a novel. "Not so much finishing them." More polite laughter. Mark smirked. Sarah kept her eyes on her notes, pretending they suddenly mattered. No one stopped her. No one asked if what she was doing was relevant. I said nothing, because anything I said would have made me look defensive, emotional, and that's what she wanted, to make me react, to confirm whatever version of me she'd already painted for them. A low hum filled my ears, not from the room, but from inside my own chest, the same sound I'd felt years ago at a holiday dinner when my father raised his glass after Jessica got her first executive title. "To Jessica," he said proudly, "my legacy, and to Alyssa for always being so kind." I had smiled then, too, just like now, small, controlled. But I remember how my stomach had curled, how that word kind had landed like a backhanded compliment dressed up for church. Back in the glass room, I sat, crossed one leg over the other. My sister had moved on, directing the next question to a polished candidate with a fancy university ring and the self-confidence of someone who'd never been interrupted mid-sentence in front of an entire panel. I didn't listen to his answer. I was watching her now. Not the executive, not the senior strategist, but the girl who used to read my poems aloud during slumber parties to get laughs. The girl who told me boys wouldn't like me unless I learned how to shut up and smile. The girl who once told me she protected me from the world, when really she was preparing it to ignore me. I breathed in again, deeper this time. I didn't speak. I didn't run. Instead, I pulled a pen from my folder and began writing quietly along the margin of the agenda sheet. Names, details, each panelist who had laughed, each one who hadn't intervened. I wasn't just taking notes, I was documenting the silence. Because if I wasn't going to be given the floor, I'd take the proof. The worst part wasn't even the insult. It was the way they let it slide, like it was normal, expected, like I didn't belong enough to even earn their discomfort. I didn't let it break me, not this time, because they thought I was still playing the role they gave me. But something had shifted, and not in my sister, in me. Mark cleared his throat and leaned back like he was about to announce the weather, not deliver the next round of corporate showmanship. "Let's shift gears," he said, tapping the folder in front of him with the smugness of a man who believed he was both judge and entertainer. "No devices, just your brains. Time for the real fun." A woman to my left adjusted her sleeve, already pulling a pen from her clutch. Another man straightened his spine as if he were prepping for combat. I reached into my bag for my pen, my fingers finding it by feel. A thick paper packet landed in front of each of us with a thud. 15 minutes, Mark announced. Systems, logic, problem solving, real-life scenarios. Let's see who sinks or swims. I opened the test. It was brutal, yes, but not beyond me. I'd built frameworks twice as complex on nights when insomnia was my only friend. I tuned everything out. The whispers, the tapping pens, even Jessica's shoes clicking lightly as she crossed her legs beside Mark. I worked clean. I moved fast, but not rushed. I knew this language better than I knew most people. Finished with a minute to spare, I placed my pen down, breathing once, then slid the packet forward with quiet certainty. Mark picked it up like it offended him. He flipped the pages slowly, almost theatrically. Didn't read a word. Then he smiled, sarcastic, the kind of grin you reserve for toddlers who think they've done something impressive. "Great handwriting," he said. Then, without breaking eye contact, he tore the entire packet in half, not fast, slow, page by page, crackle by crackle. The room went silent, the kind of silence that doesn't come from respect, but from tension so thick it could drown you. He let the pieces fall into the trash beside him. "This isn't that kind of company," he added. A soft laugh from someone in the back. I didn't turn to see who. My jaw tightened, but I didn't say a word. Jessica didn't even blink. She sipped her drink like she was watching a rerun of a show she'd already memorized. And for a second, I almost believed I had failed again. But then something inside me shifted. Not the kind of shift people write in poems. No sudden fire, no metaphorical phoenix, just a sharp clarity. I'd seen this scene before, not here, but 18 months ago when a nonprofit reached out, excited about a demo I'd sent them. We talked timelines, budgets. They called my approach elegant. I'd stayed up for nights refining it, believing this deal would change everything. Then the silence came, followed by an official email. "We're moving in a different direction." Weeks later, I found out Jessica had joined the consulting firm that picked up that same client. They launched their new system with bullet points I'd written, diagrams I'd drawn, but no one asked, no one credited. And I told myself, maybe I wasn't ready back then. Maybe I needed to be sharper, better. Now I saw it for what it was. It wasn't failure. It was theft. Today was no different. Only this time, I had witnesses. I looked at the shredded pages in the bin, then down at my folder. I flipped it open, wrote one sentence in my notes. "Don't mistake silence for agreement. I saw everything." I closed the folder again, slowly, deliberately. I didn't look at Mark, didn't look at Jessica, because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and I wasn't there to please. I was there to remember. I stepped out of the conference room without being told I could. No one stopped me. Maybe they thought I was cracking, walking off to cry in a stairwell. I didn't care. I just needed a moment, not to fall apart, but to keep from burning up in front of them. The hallway was quiet, sterile. My heels echoed as I turned toward the waiting area where a vending machine hummed like it held some deeper truth. I sat on a bench near the elevators, pulled my phone from my bag, and unlocked it with a breath I didn't realize I'd held. 3 new notifications blinked. One was from Chloe, an old vendor contact I'd worked with on a side project last year. Her email was short, just a forwarded message and a line. "Not sure what's going on over there, but you should see this." I opened the thread. There it was, an email that looked like it came from me. Same signature, same layout, same tone, except it wasn't mine. The subject line, "Client liability, not worth our time." And in the body, a paragraph dripping in contempt. "She's a walking liability in heels. This entire initiative reeks of desperation." I read it again, then a third time. No part of me had written that, ever. But it had my name, my work signature. The timestamp lined up with the exact window I'd been sitting in this very building, waiting for my turn to speak. I pulled up my sent folder. Nothing. No drafts, no trace. My heart didn't drop. It hardened. This was next-level sabotage. Not just erasing my name from a list or tearing up a test.
This was character assassination dressed up in pixels. I was still staring at the screen when the next notification slid down from the top, a text from my mother. "Don't fight this. Just stay calm. Let Jessica handle it." That was it. No hello, no how are you holding up, just a direct plea for obedience disguised as family concern. I blanked, then read it again, then laughed once quietly, a dry, humorless sound. Let Jessica handle it. Of course, she always got to handle things, and the rest of us, we were expected to be silent so she could keep looking polished. I remembered a dinner party at our parents' house when I was 29. I just finished a grueling contract for a startup in San Francisco, and I tried to share the news. Before I could finish a sentence, Dad raised his glass and said, "We're so proud of Jessica closing that international deal, truly the future of this family." That night, I'd wash dishes while Jessica took credit for a campaign I helped brainstorm 2 years earlier. I told myself it was just family dynamics, nothing personal. But this was war. And the worst part wasn't Jessica, it was Mom. The one who always said, "Don't cause a scene, Alyssa." The one who taught me how to disappear with grace. I stood slowly, walked to the women's restroom at the end of the hallway, and locked myself inside the farthest stall. I wasn't hiding, I was insulating. I needed a second before I let this next wave of rage touch anything outside of me. The email replayed in my mind, the text, the smug faces around that table. I could almost hear Mark's laugh again, see Jessica's eyes daring me to react. I didn't cry, I didn't pace. I pulled out my notepad, flipped to a blank page, wrote, "If they fake my words, I'll show them what truth actually sounds like." Then I tore the page out, folded it, slid it into my jacket pocket like a promise. Because they'd pushed me too far. And I wasn't just keeping score anymore. I was preparing to answer. I emerged from the restroom slower than I went in, but not because I was uncertain, because I was steady. My jacket felt heavier now, like the folded note in my pocket had some kind of weight to it, something denser than paper. Maybe it did. Maybe it was finally resolved. By the time I re-entered the main hallway, the panelists were still inside, the glass walls offering me a clear, cruel view of the same table, the same seats, the same power balance. Jessica's head was tilted back as she laughed at something Mark had said. Whatever it wasn't funny. Not to me, probably not even to him, just part of the script. Sarah, the assistant coordinating logistics, stepped into the hallway holding a tablet. She looked startled to see me standing so close. I raised a hand casually. "Do you have 5 minutes?" I asked softly. "Alone." She blanked. "Now," I nodded. "It's about my application file. There's a document I need to review, one I think was attached to a message you forwarded to me a few months ago." Her fingers tightened slightly on the tablet. "I'm not sure I'm authorized to." "You forwarded it, Sarah," I interrupted gently. "You were in the CC line. You didn't mean to, I'm sure, but it's in my archive. I just need to see it again, the metadata." A pause. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. "Give me a second." She disappeared into a side office. I paced quietly outside, not with nervousness, with purpose. When she returned, she handed me the tablet. "It's still on the server," she said, voice low. "Just be quick." The file was labeled innocuously, Q3 Candidate Evil Drafts _3. But as I opened it, something old and raw stirred. I remembered this file. I had glanced at it last fall during an application cycle. It struck me as odd at the time. My name was mentioned in passing under candidate review notes, even though I hadn't formally applied. But I let it go. I'd been tired, busy. Today, I was neither. My eyes scanned the page until I found it buried under a bullet point titled Concerns. AS, History of Inconsistent Collaboration, Not Aligned with Firm Culture. The initials were mine. The note was vague enough to dodge scrutiny, sharp enough to cut through credibility. I clicked View Change History. There it was. Timestamps, edits, revisions, and the editor ID, Jessica. I exhaled long and even. She'd prepped this months ago. She hadn't just tried to sink me during the interview. She'd been laying the groundwork long before I walked into the building. I handed the tablet back to Sarah with a single nod. "Thank you." Then I turned and walked back into the lion's mouth. The glass door made a soft click as I re-entered the conference room. The panelists barely acknowledged me. Mark gave me a glance. Jessica barely flicked her eyes upward. But I didn't head straight to my seat this time. I stood.
"Excuse me," I said loud enough to shift every spine in the room. "Before we continue, I'd like to clarify something regarding my candidacy." Mark cocked his head. "Now?" "Yes," I replied. No one told me to sit down. I stepped forward, placing a slim printout from my folder directly in front of them. This file contains internal edits made to candidate evaluations, specifically mine. It was accessed prior to the opening of this interview cycle, and the edits included language that could have influenced today's process. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. The temperature in the room dropped. Mark straightened slightly. Sarah stayed near the doorway. Not quite inside, not quite out. Jessica blinked once, but she didn't speak. "The person who edited the file," I continued, voice even, "is a current panelist." Silence spread like spilled ink. I folded my hands in front of me. I'm not here to accuse. I'm here to ensure the process is as fair as it claims to be. If there's been a misunderstanding, I welcome clarification. If not, I'm prepared to escalate through the appropriate channels. Mark looked down, not out of shame, but calculation. Jessica's jaw tensed. "Alyssa," she began, but I raised a hand. "Don't." I could still hear her voice from that winter day in our parents' kitchen, glass of wine in her hand, that fake sisterly smile. "People like you don't lead. You absorb. You orbit. I shine." Back then, I swallowed it, believed it, maybe even internalized it. But now I saw it for what it was. An older sister's fear of being followed too closely. I looked around the room, not with pleading, but with memory. I had studied every angle, every silence, every smile too wide. And now I was speaking. The tension didn't break. It didn't snap or shatter or dissolve into some tidy emotional resolution. It stretched, tight, thin, like a wire drawn between two immovable points, humming just below the frequency of disaster. After I finished speaking, a short, pointed statement I'd rehearsed only in instinct, the room filled with a thick, ambient silence. Not the kind that waits for someone to fill it, but the kind that chooses not to be interrupted. It hung there, heavy and deliberate. You could feel it brushing against your skin. Mark cleared his throat, a polite, empty sound. He clicked his pen once, then again, like a tic he didn't know he had. Jessica shifted in her seat. She leaned back, folded her arms with a subtle raise of her brows, like I just said something quaint or mildly irritating. She gave the impression of someone who'd survived worse, or at least wanted us to think so. Her look wasn't dismissive exactly, it was indulgent, the way someone might let a child finish a tantrum before telling them to go to their room. The other panelists said nothing. They didn't even look in my direction. One tapped a finger rhythmically against the desk. Another stared blankly at the projection screen as if it offered a way out. Sarah, the intern or assistant or whatever title they'd given her to justify how often they ignored her, stood near the door. She didn't speak, but her fingers twisted the strap of her tablet case in tight, anxious loops. Still nothing. No rebuttal, no questions, no challenge, just the smug, glacial silence of people who believed they still controlled the narrative. But that silence was louder than anything they could have said. It was choreographed, practiced, a performance of power. And underneath it, I could feel something start to tilt, not in their favor. Mark exhaled and adjusted his jacket. "Let's bring in the next candidate," he said lightly, as if none of what just happened mattered, as if it hadn't landed like a dropped match in a dry field. My hands remained on the table, palms flat, fingers relaxed, outwardly calm. But under the surface, my pulse thud, strong and fast. I didn't reply. There was nothing else I needed to say. Not yet. I'd already dropped the weight I came here to drop, and I was done asking for permission to exist. Jessica offered a smile then, thin, polished, the kind you reserve for a problem you think has passed. She had no idea the trigger had been reset. The gun wasn't empty. It had reloaded. They moved on as if nothing happened. Daniel, the next candidate, walked in with the earnest bounce of someone who hadn't read the room yet. His shirt collar was too stiff, his voice too eager. He launched into a pitch before the door had fully closed, rattling off metrics and mission values like he believed enthusiasm alone could carry him. And then the door opened again.
Not with a bang, not dramatically, just a simple click and a shift of air. Every head turned. Ethan Jones stepped inside. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. Ethan was the kind of man whose presence arrived before he did. People straightened their backs around him. They checked their notes, rechecked their posture, adjusted their tone. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. Power doesn't yell. It waits. Mark nearly knocked over his coffee, trying to sit straighter. Jessica went still, her hand resting on the table, tensed slightly. Ethan didn't look at them. He looked at me. "Alyssa," he said, voice low but unmistakably clear, as he crossed the room and walked behind my chair. "You good?" I met his eyes. Steady. "I'm solid," I said. He gave a small nod, then turned and placed a folder on the center of the table. Neat, deliberate, like the drop of a chess piece mid-match. "I'll be joining this review," he said. His tone was calm, controlled, but the words carried weight. Silence returned. Not the smug kind from earlier. This was colder, stiffer. You could almost hear the mental scrambling. Mark froze mid-pen click. Jessica parted her lips like she wanted to say something, but no words came. She blinked too slowly, calculating something behind her eyes. Ethan didn't sit. He didn't need to. He stood with the posture of someone who didn't just walk into the room. He owned it. I looked down the table at the panelists. A few clutched pens like they were lifelines. Sarah had moved slightly. Not much, but enough to press herself back against the wall. Someone whispered, barely audible. I didn't bother to see who. Mark tried weakly to reassert some kind of structure. "Mr. Jones, this is a scheduled candidate assessment." "I'm aware," Ethan said, cutting in without sharpness, just certainty. "And it's proceeding, but I'll be observing directly." He let that pause linger. "Particularly for candidates whose records include metadata inconsistencies, the kind that suggest manual edits." That landed like a slap across a quiet room. Mark froze mid-pen click. Jessica parted her lips, like she wanted to say something, but no words came. She blinked too slowly, calculating something behind her eyes. Ethan didn't sit. He didn't need to. He stood with the posture of someone who didn't just walk into the room. He owned it. I looked down the table at the panelists. A few clutched pens like they were lifelines. Sarah had moved slightly, not much, but enough to press herself back against the wall. Someone whispered, barely audible. I didn't bother to see who. Mark tried weakly to reassert some kind of structure. "Mr. Jones, this is a scheduled candidate assessment." "I'm aware," Ethan said, cutting in without sharpness, just certainty. "And it's proceeding, but I'll be observing directly." He let that pause linger. "Particularly for candidates whose records include metadata inconsistencies, the kind that suggest manual edits." That landed like a slap across a quiet room. Jessica straightened in her seat. Her expression shifted, less composed now, more guarded. She tried to reset, but she was behind the rhythm. The room had changed, and I could feel it. The shift, the rebalancing of weight, the recalibration of power. It was in the way people sat differently now, in the silence that wasn't in their control anymore. I looked at her directly. She didn't meet my eyes. "You know," I said slowly, not loud, but with intention, "I was asked this morning if I wanted to withdraw." I stood, calm, deliberate. I wasn't angry. I wasn't rattled. I was done playing the part they wrote for me. "But I'm not stepping down," I said. "I'm stepping in." I paused, let it land. "And if anyone still thinks I'm here by mistake," I scanned the room, "you're welcome to keep thinking that." Then I smiled. Not the kind that says thank you. The kind that says, watch me. I work better underestimated. No one responded. Mark didn't smile. Jessica didn't smirk. They'd stopped pretending it was business as usual. Ethan folded his arms across his chest. That was his version of applause. From the corner of my vision, Sarah looked at me just briefly. Her face didn't carry pity. It carried something else. Relief. Because sometimes power doesn't announce itself with volume. Sometimes all it takes is standing up. Ethan's presence didn't end the games. It just shifted the rules. The room settled into a false calm, the kind that buzzes beneath the surface like an old power line, crackling but unseen. No one dared dismiss me now, but they weren't apologizing either. Mark began asking generic questions again, mechanical and clipped. Jessica's voice had lost its silky confidence. Now every word she spoke landed brittle. They were pretending nothing had happened. That was their strategy now. Reset the stage, drag the hour to its end, hope no one noticed the rot beneath the gloss. But I wasn't pretending, and I wasn't done. I leaned toward the assistant seated near the corner. She looked barely out of grad school, badge half tucked into her blazer, fingers twitching nervously on the mouse. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you have access to the internal session feed from this morning?" She blinked. Technically, yes. I'd like it reviewed. From the moment I entered this room until now, all audio and visual data." Her eyes darted toward Mark, who stared back like she'd just slipped on a landmine. "That's not protocol," he said, smiling too wide. Ethan didn't move from where he stood near the corner, arms crossed, but his voice cut through. "It is today." The girl nodded and tapped a few keys. The wall screen behind us flickered to life. The room didn't exhale, it just watched. No music, no sound design, just footage. There I was, standing awkwardly by the door, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Jessica whispering to Mark, Sarah smirking, my chair left out of line, no one offering to fix it. Every insult in the form of silence, every unspoken decision caught in high definition. It was all there, unedited, undeniable. The playback ended with Mark flipping through my folder, tearing the pages, and laughing like it was casual. I didn't turn around. I let the silence do the talking. Then a sound, soft, deliberate, heels clicking against the floor. Sarah stood. "I have something," she said, her voice low. "That wasn't submitted officially." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. I wasn't sure if I'd ever use this. I saved it for safety. But this, today, this isn't safety anymore. She walked forward and handed it to the assistant. Not Mark, not Jessica. The screen refreshed. A new file loaded. It was a chat log between Mark and Jessica, time-stamped from the morning of the interview. Jessica. Derail her early. Hint at resume gaps. Get panel. Laughing. Makes her defensive. Mark. Copy that. Want me to throw in something about energy, too? LOL. Jessica. Perfect. She shuts down fast. Easy win. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at Jessica. For the first time since I walked into this building, she didn't have a comeback. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her gaze went to Ethan. But he wasn't offering rescue. Not anymore. "Explain that," one of the board members said. He was older, seated quietly most of the time, a man who hadn't taken sides. Until now. Mark tried. It was banter, just shorthand, internal venting. The board member narrowed his eyes. So this wasn't objectivity, it was repayment? Mark blinked. "I don't—" "You owed her," the board member said flatly. "She covered something for you. That's why you backed her." Mark went quiet. No one stood up for him. No one stood up for Jessica. The panel's collective posture sagged like air leaking from a balloon. Whatever script they were following had ended. They weren't in control anymore. I didn't need to yell. I didn't throw anything. I just stood up again and said, "I believe we all know where this leaves us." And for once, no one interrupted. I stayed standing, though no one asked me to. Something in me refused to sit for the verdict this time, not when the truth hadn't finished speaking. The light from the windows stretched longer now, casting golden lines across the table, like a courtroom verdict in slow motion. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars, pedestrians, people living their lives, oblivious to the quiet storm unfolding in this room. I placed a single folder on the polished table. No words, just motion. Ethan stepped forward and nodded toward the board. "This document has been reviewed by IT security and verified internally." Mark shifted in his seat. Jessica didn't. I watched her the entire time. Her face stayed still. Too still. I'd seen that expression before. Not guilt, not panic, calculation. Inside the folder was a simple printout, a forensic trace. Email metadata, login timestamps, IP logs. The email that had been circulated, the one supposedly sent from my account, the one calling a partner or liability in heels, hadn't come from me. It had originated from Jessica's admin login, her credentials, her timestamp, her location, the corporate IP assigned to her desk, her laptop. At 9:16, 2 days before the interview. I didn't narrate it. I let the paper speak. The board chair leaned forward, read it once, then again. He looked at Ethan, then back at Jessica. She finally broke the silence. "This is being taken out of context," she said. "There could have been an access confusion. I delegate emails all the time." "No," I cut in, calm, precise. "Your name, your credentials, your device. This wasn't delegation. This was fabrication." She scoffed, but quieter than before. And then I said the thing I hadn't planned to. "You didn't just lie," I said. "You erased me again." She froze. I let it sit there, because years ago, when her boutique firm was about to collapse in the wake of her divorce, she came to me quietly, desperate, and I rewrote her pitch presentation in 48 hours flat. I rebuilt her entire deck, reframed the language, polished the financials. She won the promotion, she took the credit, and never mentioned my name. I hadn't brought it up since, but Mark had been at that firm too. I saw his eyes flicker now. He remembered.
I looked at Jessica. "You've always known how to shine," I said, "but only when you could block someone else's light." She flinched. A beat of silence passed. Then a familiar defense tactic. "You've always been so dramatic," she said, voice rising. "You're mad I'm better. You always have been." There it was, the panic mask. "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm done." I didn't need the room to like me. I didn't need to explain who I was anymore. I just don't take orders from ghosts. She blinked. "You think this is justice?" she asked, voice trembling now. "You think these people actually care about your truth? They're using you." And maybe they were. Maybe some of them had only shifted because the wind changed. But I looked right at her and smiled. I stopped needing applause the moment I stopped chasing your approval. And then I said the quietest thing I'd said all day. When we were 12 and you read my journal out loud to the whole school assembly, that's when I learned the ones who fear the truth the most are always the ones who bury it deepest. The room didn't gasp. It just stopped breathing. The legal counsel adjusted his glasses. "In light of this evidence, we recommend immediate disciplinary review and possible termination. The board may proceed to close deliberation." Jessica didn't speak again. Mark kept staring at the table. No one looked me in the eye, not out of shame, but out of reckoning. I stayed where I was, not triumphant, not smug, just rooted. They thought they'd buried me, but I wasn't buried. I was planted. A week later, the corner office still sat untouched. It had the best view in the building. Glass walls on two sides, mahogany desks centered like a command post, sunlight pouring in during the late mornings and stretching across the hardwood in warm, uninterrupted lines. But it was empty. No nameplate on the door, no chair pulled up to the desk, no framed photos, no personal items, just stillness. Like the room had finally let out a long breath it had been holding for years. They offered it to me. Ethan did. HR followed. Even the board chair sent me a formal note. "Alyssa, the space is yours if you want it." I didn't think twice. "Thanks," I said, "but I'd rather be where the actual work happens." So instead of a panoramic skyline and glass doors that sealed you off from everyone else, I took a desk on the 7th floor. Open plan, low ceilings, constant motion. I picked a spot wedged between the development team's row and a humming vending machine that ate dollars more often than it dispensed snacks. The air always smelled faintly like cold brew and dry erase markers. Conversations overlapped, deadlines buzzed in the background. I loved it. There, among half-drawn whiteboard diagrams and weeks-old sticky notes curling at the edges, I felt more grounded than any title ever could have made me. I wasn't managing perception anymore. I was building, contributing, being. When I finally pinned something to the corkboard above my monitor, it wasn't a certificate or a fancy plaque. It was a torn piece of paper. All that was left of the technical skills assessment Mark had shredded in front of the review panel. I'd pulled it from the trash that day, smoothed out the wrinkles. The ink was faded now, the edges worn, but I framed it anyway, not as a souvenir of pain, but as a receipt. Beside it, I stuck a yellow Post-it. In thick black ink, I'd written, "This is what reclaiming space looks like." I didn't expect anyone to notice. It wasn't for them. But that afternoon, while I was knee-deep in organizing sprint notes, someone lingered beside my desk. I looked up. It was her, the quiet one from the interview group, the woman who kept her head down every time Jessica interrupted someone. I remembered how small she'd seemed in that room, how her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to disappear.
Now she stood taller, shoulders squared, voice steady. "I didn't get the job," she said, "but I wanted to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not letting them silence you," she said. "I didn't speak up that day. I wanted to, but I froze. Watching you made me realize I don't have to keep shrinking just to be safe." She gave a small nod, no dramatics, no lingering, and walked off. I didn't move right away, just sat there, staring at the space she'd occupied, a lump quietly rising in my throat. Not from guilt, not from regret, just the weight of knowing something real had shifted, not just in me, but in someone else. That night, I found myself at the little cafe 2 blocks from the office, same one I used to go to after interviews, back when I still thought chasing job titles was the same as chasing purpose. I sat outside, hoodie pulled over my head, steam rising from my cup. I scrolled through my phone. 2 missed calls. The first was from Ethan. His name still sat in my contacts, even though I hadn't used it in weeks. I listened. "I owe you an apology," his voice said, scratchy through the speaker. "I should have spoken up when my parents compared you to Jessica. I didn't. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." I didn't replay it, didn't delete it either, just let it sit there. The second voicemail was from my father. "I didn't see it all," he said. His voice cracked like he was admitting something to himself as much as to me. "I should have asked more questions, should have listened harder. I'm sorry, Alyssa." That one stayed with me longer. But I didn't return the call. Not out of bitterness, not because it didn't matter, but because for once, I didn't need it to. Some silences aren't meant to be broken. Some gaps don't need to be filled, especially when you've learned to hear your own voice clearly and trust it. The next morning, I got to my desk early. The team wasn't in yet, the floor was quiet, except for the hum of monitors booting up. There was something beneath my keyboard, a post-it note. No message, no name, just a single small check mark drawn in the corner. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. I knew what it meant. That's what impact looks like. Not applause, not headlines, just quiet acknowledgement from someone who saw you stand when it wasn't easy and chose to do the same. Some victories don't come with confetti. They come with space. And this time, it was mine. Before we wrap up, let me leave you with this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to scream or beg or prove. It's to stand quietly, unapologetically, and let truth do the talking for you. This story wasn't just about a job or even about family betrayal. It was about reclaiming space you were told you didn't deserve, about drawing the line, not with anger, but with evidence, grace, and resilience. If you've ever been silenced, overlooked, or made to feel like you weren't enough, I hope this reminds you, your voice matters, even when it shakes, especially when it shakes. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight for your worth in a room that wanted you silent? Do you believe family should always be forgiven, no matter what they do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if this story touched something in you, just drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're out there. And hey, if you made it this far, you're definitely my kind of people. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that don't just entertain, they speak. Because sometimes the quietest battles leave the deepest impact. And we're all just trying to find the courage.